So in this video I'm going to look at what's holding back the completion of the Eurovelo 3 route that's supposed to run from Dublin to Galway, and specifically the Royal Canal section of that. So the Royal Canal runs from Dublin to the Shannon. It's about 230 years old, and now you can cycle most of the length of it. However, there's one bit you can't, and that is called the deep sinking, and in a moment I'm going to show you why you probably shouldn't cycle it, because I did it just to demonstrate, but that's what's holding it up. Now later in the video I'll talk about what that hold up is and get into more details about it.
And so here we reach the tricky part of our journey, Castleknock train station. You reach this section that's called the deep cutting. You might miss it, but over in the vegetation there's a sign that says no bicycles, and you might be going, why is that? Because it doesn't look too bad from here, apart from the gate blocking access. So we're going to see why it's not a good idea to cycle this. It's basically turns into a very narrow track with about a 4-metre drop into the canal. That's hence the deep cutting part. There's roots growing across it, there's rocks, and there's also mud when it's raining, so you could very easily slip off the side and into the water you'd go, and you'd have a 4-metre climb to get back out again. So reasonably speaking, you'd be at risk of drowning. So in the interest of science, I'm going to do it, give you a look at it, but yeah, my advice, don't do it. Take the detour that goes through the estates here, about 3 kilometres, and brings you back on just after Coolmine train station.
Okay, so what was this like to cycle? Well, the first thing, this early bit is deceptive. It's wide, but then it narrows, and as it gets narrower, the canal sinks down below the level of the bank. So I really wouldn't recommend doing it. I particularly wouldn't recommend doing it on a loaded touring bike, particularly if it's wet, because this is mud, there's tree roots. You have the problem, as you can see here, that you have a long drop into the canal. So if things go wrong, if your bike starts to slip around or whatever else, and you lose control of it, it goes into the canal. Maybe you go into the canal, again a long drop there, and clearly the worst case scenario is you could, if you're on your own, you go in, you mightn't be getting out again, you could well drown, but you could certainly lose your bike in there. It would certainly wreck your trip. So yeah, it's really not a sensible way to do it.
The deep cutting bit, as you'll have seen, is probably a little bit too dangerous to cycle. I got through, but I was definitely close to regretting even trying. It's a long drop, deep water, lots of tree roots, rocks, and a little bit slippy today because of the rain overnight. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't be doing that. But otherwise, this bit's kind of something I really care about. I'm going to add this in. There's meant to be a Eurovelo route, which is linking up the capitals, and it's meant to come in Dublin, and it's meant to go to Galway and actually end there, so that the whole route ends there. And you'll see bike tours from other countries asking if people have GPX routes for it and all the rest. It's been, non-existent basically for years, but now it's quite close to being completed. And in fact, once they complete the work on the section running up to Maynooth, you're basically going to be able to cycle the entire canal once you get through this deep cutting section all the way to the Shannon. Or you can divert at Mullingar and cycle down the Green Rail train to Athlone, get on the Shannon, right? And then from Athlone, they now have the planning process in place to do a cycle route all the way to Galway, taking a long way around. But that's all happening, finally going to happen. This is the trouble section, the deep cutting. As we've seen, we're coming all the way up from Dorset Street. That bit will be finished in a couple of months. You'll be able to come all the way up from the Liffey. But this bit isn't going to happen anytime soon because of that narrow path. It's just impossible on this side. There's not enough space between the railway and the canal bank once you get down there.
I gave my explanation there from what I knew at the time of what was holding it up, and I've since had a chance to read the council documents, which you'll find on their website, and it pretty much confirms my simple summary. There's 2 choices. One is you run the route along the south side of the canal, which is the route I cycled along. that doesn't really work because it's very narrow, it's squeezed up against the railway. In order to construct the route along that, you'd have to strip out all the vegetation, you'd have to close the canals so you can put a barge in to do the construction from. You'd have to, for a lot of it, you'd have to have a cantilevered route that would path that would stick out over the canal, and those cantilevers would have to be anchored right into the ground, and in some cases underneath the railway. So massive disruption, wouldn't really work, and quite a lot of potential for things going wrong, in particular slippage of the canal bank, which could affect the railway line. So all that is a big deal, as well as complete clearance of the vegetation. Not the ideal route. And they present the other side as a much better route. There's much more space. You would not need to do the same sort of vegetation clearances. There would not be the engineering challenges. There'd be no need to close the canal for a while. The one thing that would be unpopular with some people is the issue of compulsory purchase orders of spaces that are now gardens, but as far as I'm aware, were previously part of the canal bank. And so that's what all the heat is around it. So the current standing of this is that the council are coming back with looking for planning permission in, I think, late 2025, so about a year from when I'm recording that. It's likely that even if they get it at that stage, by contracting stage and all the rest, you'd probably be looking at 27 before it was completed. But given the way planning works in Ireland, it's also very likely that you would then have High Court objections being put in and possible further delays, and it could be a decade. We'd have the continued big shame of that great potential cycle route running all the way from Dublin to the Shannon in two different ways, and then possibly all the way to Galway, because that section will probably start quite soon, just not materialising. I've spent a bit of time looking at some of the opposition to it, and what I've seen is people say, oh, well, you could run a cycle path around, that would divert through the housing estates. And I have cycled that. You are on main roads for part of it, and what I would suggest to people who think that's a feasible solution is imagine the context where it's a family out cycling with, say, a 7-year-old child and an 8-year-old child. Would you be comfortable bringing your kids or grandkids at that age onto the roads that would connect those two up? Presuming decent cycle paths on that road, but you still have to go through roads and go through road junctions. And would you be comfortable doing that for 3 kilometres? A little bit over 3 kilometres, in fact. And I think the answer to that is no. It's fine for adult cyclists like myself. It's a bit of a nuisance. You're coming off the canal. I can do it, though. It's not the end of the world. I think in terms of opening up the whole greenway for families, it's just not a runner. And there is, it seems, a very possible solution in terms of opening up that north bank instead.